Appleknocker Radio.
Alright friends, the spiral staircase of the Manson family lore has captured my imagination and my curiosity from the moment I first read about it. It's an aspect of the case that the hardcore Manson heads know about, but most mainstream people never hear about it, largely because it preceded by quite a while the sensationalized murders that most people focus on when they think of the story. But this spiral staircase is a very mysterious place that played a very critical role in the Manson family development. And it has always been curious to me, but it was even more so because it actually led to a strange personal experience for myself. And I can't go into great detail about it because the person, it led me to this contact by a person who actually dropped a name that I've never seen mentioned anywhere else in Manson family lore ever. And but he was very clear that he didn't want his identity shared with anybody else, and that he even wanted the nature of the communication to be kept secret. And so I'm a man of my word. If I tell you I'm gonna keep a secret, I will keep the secret. And so I've kept the secret, but it's even gone beyond that because I've actually thought of pursuing what he told me, but the problem is I don't even know exactly how to do that without risking exposing him, right? But anyway, that's a whole other thing. But what he said to me feeds into what I'm about to talk about. It's one aspect of what he said to me is very important to what I want to talk about today. But for those people who aren't familiar with the way that this place called the Spiral Staircase fits into the Manson family story, there was a house in Topanga Canyon. It was kind of like out in the middle of nowhere. There were some other houses around. It wasn't like, way in the wilderness or anything, but it was kind of like a remoter part of the canyon. And it was supposedly owned by a woman named Gina. Though as far as I know, her name as Gina has never been confirmed. I believe that was just the name that was her that was being passed around. But it was a very nice house. It was called the Spiral Staircase because it had an external spiral staircase outside the house. It was a very nice house, but it had been left just as kind of almost like just a crash pad or a party house. And so it became this central nexus point for all kinds of characters in the underground party scene, but also supposedly in much darker things. And now when you start getting into this, into exactly where the Spiral Staircase fits, you have to remember we're taking this all from first-hand accounts of people, and that's by nature never fully reliable, but it's even less reliable when you're dealing with people who spent a lot of their times whacked out on drugs, and in some cases were just criminals and lie a lot, right? So, we're trying to piece this together from all these different accounts of people of various variable levels of credibility. But out of that, one account of the story from Manson himself in the book Manson in His Own Words, which was an interview that Manson did with I think the guy used to be a prison mate of his or a friend of his. Then the guy got out and came back, and Manson agreed to do this interview with him. And the idea being that Manson would speak a little more freely with somebody that he used to know. And out of that emerged Manson's claim of the whole story, which was, like I said, people who were there implied that there was all kinds of weird stuff, and I'll get into one of the other weird aspects of it in just a minute. But one of the weird things was that it was kind of the central nexus point for people of all kinds of alternative spiritual and occult ideas, including some supposedly really dark stuff, and this is by Manson's own account, and Manson in His Own Words. Supposedly, according to Manson's account, the family, before they went to the Spiral Staircase, or before they found the Spiral Staircase, really were all about peace and love. And they were criminal. They were always stealing and things like that. But they weren't violent, and they didn't have any malicious ends. Manson swears that there was some really dark stuff that happened at the Spiral Staircase, including animal sacrifice. I don't remember if he said human sacrifice, but definitely animal sacrifice. And all kinds of orgies and things went on there. And at the spiral staircase was where Diane Lake, who was the youngest member of the Manson family, that's where she met the family. And there's a really weird aspect to that story. And this aspect comes out of a member of the family, which was Diane Lake's book. It was one of the more recent, maybe the most recently published Manson books. Lake was only 14 years old, and like I said, the youngest member of the family. But she says that she actually met the family when she went to the spiral staircase, because I think she just heard she could sleep there and went there, and there was Manson and his girls, or some of the Manson family was there. I can't remember if actual Manson was there, but supposedly they had a picture of Diane Lake, and they said, "Oh, Diane, like, we've been looking for you." And Diane's explanation for that was that her parents had basically been out just like spreading the word, like saying, "Look for our daughter," because her parents were also hippies bouncing around this 1960s Southern California scene. They weren't trying to get her back. They had given Diane permission to go out and do this thing, but I think they were just like kind of keep an eye out for her, make sure she's okay kind of thing. But that story is actually really kind of weird in light of the discoveries of Tom O'Neill and chaos. Because Tom O'Neill's research suggests the possibility that Manson really was part of some kind of mind control operation. Yeah, I know that's crazy, but I'm telling you, read the book and then tell me which of all the Manson books ever written presents the best evidence and what that story indicates. And also, I should say that Tom O'Neill, his research, to me, largely just validates a lot of the implications of Adam Gorightly's excellent "The Shadow over Santa Susanna." The big difference is that O'Neill finds the receipts, he finds the harder evidence. But anyway, so there's this idea that this possibility that Manson was actually part of some kind of mind control operation, and that he was being protected as like maybe an informant of some kind, because leading up to the murders, he was picked up for all kinds of things, a couple times for like relatively serious crimes, and the police just kept letting him off. And that's always been kind of a mystery. If Tom O'Neill's research is correct, it wasn't really so strange. It was happening because Manson was being protected, because he was acting as some kind of informant or some kind of insider of some sort. We'll never really be certain. We'll probably never really know for sure. But O'Neill definitely finds enough evidence to suggest that is a very real possibility. But also, I believe Bobby Beausoleil being the member of the family who murdered the music teacher Gary Hinman. For those people who aren't exceptionally or are very familiar with the case, not exceptionally, just aren't real familiar with the case. So the Manson family is mainly known for the murders of the Sharon Tate in all of those people involved. But there were a couple other murders outside of it, including the murder of Gary Hinman. And that was Bobby Beausoleil, who was not part of the Tate murders. But that's a whole other thing. Try to go into that, that'll become its own aside. But I believe also Bobby Beausoleil met the family at the spiral staircase. So the spiral staircase was like, it played like kind of a formative role in the growth of the family, right? But it was just also a generally mysterious place. And like one of the things that was known to go on there were these acid light shows. And the acid light shows were a huge part of the what we think of as the hippie generation, the counterculture of the 1960s. They became really, it was the Family Dog would hold, the Family Dog was like a promotional group, would hold these shows down in San Francisco at the, it's called the Fisherman's or something. There were a couple big ballrooms that they would frequently have them at. But those of you who didn't experience it, just about anybody has seen it in historical accounts of the 60s, big light shows everywhere. You had the what do you call that? The oil lamp things, the big light shows, and the music, and then everybody tripping on acid. And that's interesting because there's been people who have come out since and suggested that in itself was some kind of psychological experiment, if not mind control experiment. All the crazy lights with the hallucinogenics in people's minds, in the loud music, seeing like what kind of behavioral modification can go on there. Now there are ideas about that, and there's real evidence for it too, but it's not definite. And I'm always careful when talking about these things. Number one, because I don't want to just run with some kind of loose evidence on something, but also because the 60s were a critical era in our history, and a lot of bad stuff came out of it, but a lot of good stuff came out of it too. And also the people who were involved in it, who were deeply involved in that for understandable reasons, they want to believe that it was all very organic and beautiful and a spontaneous thing that grew out. And I can definitely understand why, and I can sympathize with them. And they may be right, who knows? But I'm just saying, I'm always a little careful when I discuss that era and the evidence that has emerged that there was some kind of strange psychological tomfoolery going on that maybe a lot of the people involved weren't aware was going on. But regardless, my point is, what I wanted to discuss is that in that call that I got from this gentleman, the mysterious cryptic call that I got, he said something that has always stuck in my mind. It wasn't the meat of why he contacted me. It was just kind of an aside. But he was talking about the spiral staircase, and I forget exactly how he worded it. When I got this call, it was like the middle of the night, and it was just a weird call. But what he basically said was the spiral staircase into your mind, right? Into your subconscious, into the dark parts of your subconscious. And he actually referenced some, how can I not remember? Is a really significant author, Borg? I don't know, but it was an author who wrote these. He was one of like the early kind of surrealist type writers who would write about these aspects of our minds, and he compared it to his writing. But yeah, and so what he said has always stuck with me, and he didn't say it in the way that it has expanded in my mind, in my in the petri dish of my own imagination. But so as time has gone on, and I've encountered ideas such as about things like, consciousness preceding matter, and this actually being a universe of consciousness, as opposed to a dead universe of matter, like a living universe. And and this idea that the human mind, or that reality itself is married to, or not married, is directly connected to human consciousness. But also this idea of egregores, and this is actually the idea of egregores is the main gist of what I was going to discuss. So the idea of egregores, which I learned the most from Mark Stavish's excellent book titled Egregores, which I recommend for everybody. The idea of the egregore is that anytime you have people together with a shared ethos, ideal, whatever it could be, that their combined consciousness, their group consciousness, can actually kind of become its own intelligence, and it kind of becomes its own being. Very strange idea until you really think about it, and I feel like you can actually see it play out all around us all the time, right? And so you have different egregores of different strength, and like an extreme example is people that are in a cult, and this is going to come to what I want to talk about. People that are in a cult, they develop very strong egregores, and these are egregores that are very localized to the people that are in this cult, right? And the egregore kind of takes on its own consciousness and directs these people and steers them. They think they're steering it, but it's really steering them. And so the egregores, they're formed by joined human consciousness, but they have like their own consciousness, right? Really weird idea. But I keep thinking about it with the whole Manson family thing, because the Manson family case remains a mystery, right? a total mystery. It's one of those things, the more you look into it, the stranger it becomes. It's like the surface story told by Vincent Bugliosi was obviously crap. This book proves that without question, inarguably, in my opinion. But even beyond that, right? So then you start saying, well, there's all this other kind of shady, weird stuff going on. There was kind of this conspiratorial net, this network, this wider, broader thing that was happening, right? And so then the natural conclusion when people hear that, the natural conclusion is to think, well, this must have been like everything that happened, all the murders, all the horrors, all of these things. It had to be a result of this broader net, this broader network that was surrounding the whole situation, right? But I'm not so certain that's actually true, right? And I think this may explain why, even after years later, when all the people that are in jail, they're in jail, right? And nothing's going to come out of it. All the people that are out of jail, they know they were safe of it. Like the events were long over, and still people were trying to figure out exactly what the motives were, right? And that's something that has always struck me really strongly about the case, is that like you have all this, some people say you have the whole helter-skelter idea, which was that the Beatles, Manson was so crazy that he thought the Beatles were telling him to do this because they wanted him to start this race war or whatever, right? So there's that explanation. But then there's also, I think it was Susan Atkins and others, Susan Atkins being Sadie Mae Glutz, who said that it was actually that what they were trying to do was they wanted to get Bobby Bousselet out of jail by doing a whole series of murders, because if they did that, then they could say that he wasn't responsible for the Gary Hinman murder, because they could say, look, Bobby Bousselet's already incarcerated and the murders are still happening, so obviously he wasn't the one who did Gary Hinman, right? But there have been, all like the people involved have been like, well, this was the real motivation. No, this was the real motivation. No, this was the real motivation. You have all these different stories coming out of it. And so everybody, you have some people who will fixate on one and be like, oh, well, that's the real story. That's the real story. That's the real story. And then there are people who say, well, they're all lying, and they've always been lying this whole time. They just keep lying, right? Like nobody will say what really happened. The interesting thing to me about that, or when I think about this, right, like I try to put myself in their shoes, and I try to relate it to how life in general seems to happen, right? How does life in general seem to happen? Generally, right, you do something in life, and you will then tell yourself you did it for reason X, right? Now, this has actually been proven, or not proven. This has been shown in clinical studies. People make decisions and then convince themselves that they had decided upon why they're going to make the decision, and then they made the decision. But that's not true. Like, we usually actually make a choice, we make an action, and then later we invent the reasons to justify to ourselves why we did it. And this is a very important aspect of human consciousness and human just life, right? And it's one that people overlook, and I think it's one that people are very uncomfortable with, maybe definitely for understandable reasons, because we want to feel like we're all totally in control of what we do and who we are. And it's kind of strange and unsettling to think that we're making decisions and then fooling ourselves into why we did them. But the thing is, it's true, and I can see it in myself, right? Even though I'm aware of this, I still do it. Right. And so then you start getting into more questions of human consciousness, right? Specifically questions of disembodied non-human intelligences operating around human intelligence, consciousnesses operating around human consciousness and directly influencing human consciousness. But it happening in such a subtle way. Like, I'm not talking about like the extremes of like a full-blown possession that requires an exorcism. But this idea that there are floating non-human consciousnesses out there that periodically will influence a given person. And we won't maybe not even be aware of it, right? And these might be instances, we've all had moments where you did something in your life that was very out of character, very unlike you. And then afterwards you look back and you wonder why you did that, and you even wonder, like, who was that person? That wasn't me, right? Now, there's a lot of potential explanations for that. Obviously, the materialists out there have their own explanation, right? Like, materialists, if people who believe that it's all just matter and there are no disassociated, inhuman intelligences out there, consciousnesses out there. The materialists have their own explanations for that. But a possible explanation, if we do indeed live in an animist universe with different consciousnesses floating around ours, maybe we are influenced more by these other intelligences that are outside ourselves. Maybe we're influenced by them on a pretty regular basis, right? And so then this feeds into my idea, or the kind of thought experiment that I run with on this, which is that maybe when the Manson family is talking about their motives, maybe they weren't lying. Maybe they really didn't know why they did it, right? Like, now that doesn't mean that there weren't because there's also ideas that it was that they were actually like acting almost like as hit squad for, and there is evidence for this. There is evidence to suggest this, that they were acting kind of as a hit squad for a drug burn that had gone bad. And that's definitely a possibility, right? But when I look at it, it's almost like they did it, and then afterwards there were these reasons and motives that kind of made sense. But ultimately, I'm open to the possibility, at least the exploration, the idea, that the Manson family, with those months that they lived so closely together, and they apparently had some very unique kind of spiritual ideas. Manson was into what people would call magic, like actual like magic, and these kind of adult occult philosophies, and like I think it was Abraxas that Abraxas, which was like love and hate combined into one, like even like kind of like a Shiva character, representing both creation and destruction, which is maybe part of the reason why they said such crazy things about like murder is love kind of thing. Like it might have stemmed out of that metaphysical philosophy. But anyway, the idea is they were living in this situation where they were very removed from society, and they were sharing the family stuff, but also these kind of spiritual, occult, esoteric ideas. My idea, and it was actually interesting because Joe dropped a comment in one of my previous videos mentioning that he believed he heard Nicholas Schreck suggest this as an offhand suggestion in some interview, and I have no idea. Joe wasn't even certain that this happened. I can't vouch for it. I've never heard it. And Nicholas Schreck has changed a lot over the time, so maybe Schreck wouldn't even stand by this anymore. But that Schreck had also suggested that there might have been some kind of egregore that arose out of that. But anyway, the basic idea is that basically the Manson family, the idea that I'm floating right now, the suggestion that I'm making, well, there's a couple, but is that the Manson family created its own egregore, and that the egregore was actually driving their behavior. And the egregore pushed them to commit the crimes that they did, and only later did they try to make sense of it. And that doesn't mean that it didn't actually have some kind of tangible, practical outcomes, or like motives that they could tie in afterwards. But that ultimately maybe they were just driven by this impulse of this consciousness, this group consciousness that they had created and were no longer in control of. None of them were in control of it anymore. They had created it, and it then was using them as the puppets. That's a really weird idea. Weird idea number 2. Getting back to the spiral staircase. So you had the whole 60s counterculture hippie thing was a total transformation in American consciousness. Now, I'm not saying like the whole nation didn't change at that time. It's actually the hippies were actually relatively small. Actually, they were just a small representation of the American population. there weren't that many of them, really. But their impact on the nation's broader consciousness was extreme. I mean, we all know that, right? I mean, it's probably one of the most celebrated, studied, discussed, and controversial decades in American history, and certainly of modern American history. And so, so you had this going on, but then with the Manson family, the events of the murders were so significant, not only because they were obviously brutal and everything, but because the Manson family, at least externally, were what would be called hippies, right? And so they took this whole, there'd been years of this hippie thing building up as, the love children, peace and love and all this stuff. And they spun that right on their head, and they made everybody look at these young girls, young women in flower dresses with their hair in pigtails and looking very sweet and smiling about having murdered people, right? And it was a real jolting shock to the psyche of the country, to an extent of the world. and so what's so interesting about that is that this place called the Spiral Staircase played a formative role in that. And if you look at the family's development, they congregated at the Spiral Staircase early in their formation or evolution development, and never realizing the full significance that they were about to go to the Spiral Staircase down to the bottom of their own minds, right? So the Manson family goes to they ride the Spiral Staircase down into the darkest parts of their own psyche, and they become killers. But not only that, in doing that, they took the national psyche on the Spiral Staircase down into the subconscious, into the darkest parts of the human psyche. That's fascinating, and that is bizarre. And it's like I always say, I'm happy to use the modern parlance of the simulation hypothesis, because I think it's a good way with our modern minds to conceptualize this idea that our reality has been programmed, and that what we see is not really real. Like what we see, it's like we're browsers who are seeing interpretations of the binary information around us, but it's not the real binary information. There's deeper information beyond that, right? And so the simulation hypothesis is good for that basic idea, but I think it's the same idea that's been bandied about by mystics since time, forever. They've always been saying. But anyway. And so, but in thinking of that, in thinking of the programmed reality, this strange reality with this weird coding that is constantly playing with human consciousness, how poetic and beautiful and weird and strange, beautiful in a dark way, that the Manson family began their ride at the Spiral Staircase, right? They began their own journey into the darkest parts of their mind. They took the whole nation into the darkest parts of their mind, and it started at a place called the Spiral Staircase. If that's not evidence that there is somebody playing with reality who has a sense of poetics and a sense of humor, then I don't know what is. And yeah, so I don't know. I actually meant to, before I did this video, I was going to preempt it by saying, the subscribers, you know what you're in for. Non-subscribers, this is not going to be your normal Manson family video. And I wish I did that now, because now I realize I didn't warn people. I'm going to take this to a really weird place. But I took it to a really weird place because this is how I think, and it's fascinating, and just something I've been thinking about a lot lately. The weird synchronicity there, man. That's a really weird synchronicity, right? Isn't it not? I don't even know if that would qualify as a synchronicity per se. But it's like it's one of those details that's almost too perfectly, strangely apt to be an accident. Like it makes you look for the designer that put together this narrative where all the pieces fit so well. the spiral staircase. And we're going to take them into the bottom of their minds, take the whole nation for a ride, Well, Jacob's ladder, man. But, yeah, I don't know. Just something I've been thinking about. I hope you have all found it interesting. I rambled a bit in this video, but don't know what to say. I actually plan on, I'm going to hire some animators to do, I want to do like a whole animated spiral staircase bit, and probably be more entertaining than me just rambling, but I don't know, whatever. This is what I was thinking of, and I really do hope people found this interesting, if anybody watched to this point, which I think you probably didn't. All right, peace out, friends. Thank you very much. Bye.